Hey, good morning, everybody. Yesterday we were discussing the Louisiana Purchase. Today we're going to kind of look at some of the reaction and implications of that. So I'll pull up our PowerPoint and we'll get started. Okay, so Jefferson's bargain with Napoleon was pretty important. Uh, Almost overnight, he had avoided a possible war with France and then by consequence, an entangling alliance with England, which is not something that would want to do as a democratic Republican. And by scooping up this vast territory of Louisiana, America secured in one bloodless stroke, western half of the richest river valley in the world, and further lays its foundations to become a future major global power. Uh, so the purchase also contributes to America making, increasing our isolationist principles, meaning, it's almost like we're an island in the world. A body of water has to be crossed to reach us from both sides, so it makes us more isolationist. Increasing those principles of George Washington and what he encouraged us to do in his farewell address, believing that it would go a long way to help us to avoid entangling alliances and keeping us out of other European wars, and kind of just helping us to avoid the old world ancient system of rivalry. But in the spring of 1804, Thomas Jefferson sent his personal secretary, Meriwether Lewis, and a young Army officer named William Clark to explore the northern part of the Louisiana Purchase. With the aid of a Shoshone Indian woman named Sacagawea, Lewis and Clark ascended basically they just followed the Missouri River from St. Louis, struggled through the Rocky Mountains, and descended into the Columbia River all the way to the Pacific coast. It took them about 2.5 years. This expedition was 2.5 years long, but it yielded a great richness of scientific observations. They made maps. They learned knowledge of Indians that resided in that region, and they had a lot of adventures. Some of them were pretty hair-raising. They wrote a lot about the immense herds of buffalo, elk, deer, and antelope, and the vast pastures of the area. But they were very fortunate to even make it back alive at all. There's one example of Meriwether Lewis. He was out kind of with just a couple of the men that they took with them, and they came across a band of teenage Blackfoot Indians who were basically armed with muskets, and those Blackfoot Indians stole their horses. Well, as they're riding away, Lewis foolishly pursued them on foot, and then he shot one of them through the belly. Well, he didn't shoot them both because one of them was going to return to the Blackfoot Indian tribe, where they could possibly return with, a lot of warriors, would cause major problems. So Lewis, very fortunate to get out of there alive. They did return, and they did shoot at him, and he in one of the accounts that he wrote, he said he could feel the wind of a bullet whizzing distinctly by his head. So pretty fortunate to make it out. A lot of hair-raising adventures they had. But the expedition itself was very, very successful in its scientific exploration and observation. Okay, moving right along, talk about this gentleman, Aaron Burr. In the long run, the Louisiana Purchase greatly expanded the fortunes of the United States and the power of the federal government. In the short term, the vast expanse of territory and the feeble reach of government obliged to control it raised fears of secession. Because, literally we doubled the size of our country with no real government to speak of in this territory. So Aaron Burr, who was Thomas Jefferson's first-term vice president, he played no small role in provoking and justifying such fears. Thomas Jefferson dropped him from the cabinet in his second term, but Aaron Burr was not going to remove himself entirely from politics, as he is an extreme radical person. and the radical part of him is he leans toward Federalists. So he's like a radical Federalist. And he joined a radical Federalist extremist group, and he wanted to plot a, a, a secession movement for New England and New York. He wanted New York and New England to secede from the Union. And this is, in 1804-ish, he's wanting to do that. So Alexander Hamilton, who's also a Federalist, just not an extremist and definitely not a friend of Jefferson, he exposed and foiled Aaron Burr's conspiracy, a fellow Federalist. And Aaron Burr was upset by that. And so he challenged Alexander Hamilton to a duel. Now, dueling is definitely a thing of the past, and it was actually illegal at the time in which they did it. But basically what it is you stand out several paces from one another and you shoot at one another. Obviously, it is illegal. But, Alexander Hamilton did not like the idea of dueling. He didn't like the practice of it. But he felt his honor was at stake, and so he met Aaron Burr at the appointed hour, but did not fire his pistol. Aaron Burr did not take that option and kills Alexander Hamilton in one shot, in essence blowing the brightest brain out of our entire federal leadership, because Alexander Hamilton was a financial genius. So Aaron Burr was, his political career was pretty much dead as Alexander Hamilton at that point. So he turns his disunionist plottings to the Trans-Mississippi West, meaning the area of land we just acquired in Mississippi in the Louisiana Purchase. There he goes to a military governor of the Louisiana Territory, and his name is General James Wilkinson. And he conspires with Wilkinson to plan that a new nation be formed out of this district of Louisiana, okay? So that's what they conspired to do. Eventually, though, Thomas Jefferson catches wind of their plot, and Aaron Burr was arrested and put on trial for treason, as in, treason. So it seemed what the Jeffersonians wanted to do was to, get a guilty verdict of him and be done with Aaron Burr. But Chief Justice John Marshall held very strict to the Constitution, and he insisted a guilty verdict required proof of overt acts of treason. And what he said was just because he's planning to do treason, that does not mean he is guilty of treason. So you can't be punished for merely treasonous intentions. So Burr was acquitted from his trial, and he was sent to he wasn't sent. He fled. He left for Europe. Now get this: when he arrives in Europe, he goes and he seeks out Napoleon Bonaparte, the Emperor of France. And this is what his plan is. He goes to Napoleon and urges him to make peace with Britain and launch a joint invasion of America, where France and England would join together to invade the United States. So Burr's insurrectionary brashness demonstrated that it was one thing for the United States to purchase large expanses of land, but it's quite another thing for them to govern them effectively. So we still have quite a long ways to go in how are we going to take this vast territory of land and make sure that it is governed effectively and governed safely. And it's just one of the things that Thomas Jefferson is going to have to deal with when he runs for his second election, which happens in the year 1804, where he is triumphantly elected. He defeats Charles Pinckney of South Carolina pretty handily, 162 to 14, I believe, was the final tally. But the laurels of Jefferson's first administration soon withered. He had a good first administration, Louisiana Purchase, all kinds of good things. He sent the Marines over to Tripoli and battled with pirates and won success there. All of those laurels that he earned in that are soon going to wither under the blast of a new storm that's breaking out in Europe. So after Napoleon unloaded Louisiana on us in 1803, he deliberately provoked a renewal of his war with Britain in a conflict that lasts for years and years and years. So that puts the United States in an awkward position because we have to choose sides. So for 2 years, the United States enjoyed, good commercial, pickings. We could trade with everyone and things were good and we were making money. But a setback came in 1805 after the Battle of Trafalgar. Now, what happens here is that a one-eyed Horatio Lord Nelson achieved immortality by smashing the combined French and Spanish fleets off the coast of Spain. Okay, so what that means for us is that now that the you know the British are showing that they're capable of withstanding the onslaught of Napoleon and his allies. So they were really unable to hurt each other directly. So basically, anytime the American merchant vessels are being shipped, if we send American merchant vessels to England, French ships are going to capture them. Anytime we send American merchant vessels to France, English ships are going to catch them, and seize the things aboard, and even worse, impress the sailors. Now that doesn't mean make them, not like I'm impressed, but impressment is the forcible enlistment of sailors. They would literally, basically enslave them and make them soldiers of the sea and make them work for the Navy of their own country. And about some 6,000 bona fide United States citizens were impressed or put into naval duty just for Britain in a 3-year period from 1808 to 1811 alone. A lot of those luckless souls died or were killed in His Majesty's service, leaving their, so you can imagine if that was your family member, how would you feel if, you were just a merchant, you're just doing trade, and all of a sudden you're impressed into a fight into a foreign country's military, and then you die for it. So it leaves a lot of their kinfolk and friends feeling, embittered, bereaved. So, and everybody's looking to Thomas Jefferson to do something about it. So, Thomas Jefferson's response to this is called an embargo. Okay, it's an embargo. Now, the embargo is very unpopular. Very, very, very unpopular. What it is, Thomas Jefferson reasoned that if America would voluntarily cut off its exports, meaning the things that we ship, we're going to stop shipping entirely, then the offending powers would be forced to bow and agree to respect our rights. So the embargo, it's called the Embargo Act of 1807. I have another little picture here. 1807 is a rigorous law that forbade the export of all goods from the United States, whether it be in an American ship or in a foreign ship. So you can imagine the devastating effects of this. Devastating. The American economy staggered under the effect of the embargo long before Britain or France even began to bend. So it's like implosive. It harmed us from within. Forests of dead ship masts that we created were being stored along once bustling harbors, and docks that once rumbled were deserted. Soup kitchens that cared for some of the hungry and unemployed. Thomas Jefferson and Jeffersonian Republicans probably hurt the commerce of New England, which they it was just a terrible way to try. But his whole purpose of the embargo is to keep the United States out of war. And if our people are no longer being impressed because there's no more shipping, then that's one of the things that would draw us into war, even at the horrible expense of the embargo on our economy. So obviously, as good Americans would do, there's an enormous amount of illicit trade that happened where people were still doing their shipping, particularly along the Canadian border, where bands of armed Americans on loaded rafts overpowered many federal agents to go and continue working and continue sending their goods across the sea. So the embargo definitely not something that was good for the American economy. Now, all those people in places like Boston and New York who depended upon the harbor for their very livelihood, they still had to do something. And even though Thomas Jefferson, he's the Democratic Republican. He wants to see agriculture be put forward. In those cities where the harbor were shut down, people still needed to work. And so they turned to things like manufacturing. We can't do the trade to get the things we need, so we're going to make them ourselves. So the embargo actually does more to increase manufacturing in the United States than really any other form of, anything else. So Jefferson does more to increase manufacturing than any other president before him. And he was not a pro-manufacturing person. He did not want to see the United States become mechanized and become a manufacturing society. He wanted us to be agrarian. And that is one of the unintended consequences of the embargo. It's just like we've been saying about his presidency. Jefferson is consistently inconsistent. So on March the 1st, 1809, Congress repeals the embargo, with one exception. They're going to open up trade everywhere in the world except for Britain and France, the two most important places. So really, Congress doesn't end the embargo. So it's important, though, because this embargo is probably Jefferson's most daring act of statesmanship. He really underestimated the bulldog determination of the British, because they needed our crops, but they just found it in other places. They needed our cotton, but they just found it in other places. He really miscalculated the unpopularity of this self-destructive weapon and the difficulty of enforcing it. So, but like I said earlier, resourceful people in the United States reopened old factories, built new ones. And the real foundations of America's modern industrial might were laid behind this protective wall of the embargo. So another thing it does is that it really sets the tone. The embargo lasts for quite some time. You see 1807 is when it begins. And as you would probably know, we have a war that begins in the year 1812, and the embargo has a significant amount to do with that. And we will talk about that next time during the presidency of James Madison, president after Thomas Jefferson. So I'll wrap this up for today. And if you guys have any questions, I have office hours from 8:20 to 8:50 a.m. and then 12:05 to 12:35. And you're more than welcome to join. Come say hi, ask questions. We can discuss this information a bit further if you need, and I'm always here for you. Just shoot me a message on Schoology, email, however you want. If you want to have a one-on-one Teams meeting where you can get some one-on-one assistance, I'll be glad to do that. Like I say, I'm here for you. You guys are my number one priority, and I will be talking to you.